Hi everyone, Professor Philip Travis here. This announcement is for History 360, military history here at EOU, Eastern Oregon University. It's week 9, and I'm going to make this announcement a little bit more brief than usual, and that's because we have a lot of stuff this week. So week 9, we are reading chapter 14 from Ways of War. We also should be definitely finishing A Rumor of War by Philip Caputo. So we're looking at the Vietnam War again this week. So this is our second week examining the Vietnam War. We are going to look at the American strategy in fighting the Vietnam War in some depth. And this comes not only from our reading, but also from my lecture this week. I have another recorded lecture, of course, on the Vietnam War. It also comes from a documentary film that we'll be watching again this week. We have another documentary on Vietnam, sort of. In this case, this is a documentary that is told to a large degree from the perspective of the soldiers and the people in Vietnam that were on the ground, to kind of give us a firsthand look at what the Vietnam War looked like, particularly in the later 60s, the period in which A Rumor of War is largely covering. So the documentary film, there is also a video quiz, again, associated with the documentary film. The questions, again, are designed to more or less be in order, so you should be able to answer those. If you have the quiz up and you're watching the film, you should be able to answer them pretty well while you're watching the film. So, reading Chapter 14, Ways of War, Philip Caputo, A Rumor of War. Documentary film on the Vietnam War this week. Video quiz associated with that documentary film. Of course, our big assignment this week is our paper. We have a paper, a 4-page paper, based on your readings of E.B. Sledge's With the Old Breed and Philip Caputo's A Rumor of War. I've talked about this paper quite a bit in the recent announcements, so I'm not going to go into great length. I think we all pretty much probably understand what we need to do there. I have included in the modules last week and this week a prompt and checklist for the paper, so make sure you look at that. Make sure you understand the paper, what I'm expecting on the paper. Please do not go over 5 pages in length. This should be, we have 2 papers in this class. The next one is due in 2 weeks during exam week, and it's a 2-page paper. But please stick within the parameters. This is a 4-page paper, so do not go under 4 pages and do not go over 5 pages. I give you 1 page to sort of, go over a little bit. But please stick within the parameters. Should be Times New Roman font 12. I put a video in for you that discusses in about 10 minutes. If you don't know what Chicago Manual of Style footnotes look like, make sure you look at it. I'll tell you how to insert those footnotes. I'll give you a look at the web page for Chicago Manual of Style. I also discuss the format for the paper, introductions, the body, conclusion, these elements of a paper for an upper level history class like this. So if you need, I mean, many of you have taken my classes before, so you probably are pretty clear with that. But if you haven't and you have questions about how to do a footnote in Chicago style, if you have a question about paper format, please do watch that video tutorial that I have up for you. It's only about 9 minutes. And if you have any questions after that, please do email me and let me know. So the Sledge and Caputo paper is due this week. Be sure, paper prompt, checklist in modules, so that you make sure that you don't lose any points unnecessarily for this paper, and watch the video tutorial if you need to. All right, I think that's all. Of course, discussion forum as always this week. We've been having great discussions in this class. I'm really happy about that, so let's keep it up here. We're in week 9. So we have a great discussion forum. We have a documentary film and a video quiz. We have our Sledge and Caputo paper this week, as well as we begin to move down towards the end of the term. The factoid for this week, make it kind of brief, is this. The factoid, for 1 bonus point, make that post in the extra credit discussion forum area. Get your bonus point towards the test score at the end of the term. The factoid for this week is the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers was a kind of trove of government documents from the Defense Department. It was released in 1971 by Daniel Ellsberg. And Daniel Ellsberg worked for the Defense Department. And Daniel Ellsberg basically contacted the Washington Post, even though the New York Times sometimes gets credited with the Pentagon Papers release. It was really first released by the Washington Post, which was a very small newspaper at the time. The Pentagon Papers was a government report about Vietnam. And after its release, and it was released in many, many volumes, all of these documents that Ellsberg ultimately took out of the Pentagon. These documents were ultimately released in numerous volumes, and if you go to a university library, almost always they have all of the volumes of the Pentagon Papers. And if you're interested in writing, a research project on the Vietnam War, I mean, I guess it's probably all been done, at least as far as the Pentagon Papers are concerned. But historically, it was an amazing trove of primary source documents, because the Pentagon Papers were all of these classified materials from Vietnam. It was a private in-house report that the Defense Department, under the then Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, had made about the Vietnam War. And so it was, when it was released, it was a trove of documents that eventually came out that were primary source documents that really gave shed a lot of light on the policy thinking behind the Vietnam War. The Pentagon Papers was incredibly controversial from the view of the United States government, and particularly at the time, President Richard Nixon. Even though the Pentagon Papers there wasn't really anything in the Pentagon Papers that hurt Nixon himself. Nixon had only recently become president. It primarily hurt the policies of the presidents in the 60s, or the perception of those presidents and their handling of Vietnam in the 60s, John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. And it, elaborated on things relating to misinformation about the war, about the effectiveness of the bombing, about how the war was being conducted, about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Vietnam, of course, was an undeclared war, which was a new theme in American history, the undeclared war. It was based on the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, in which the president received basically authority to expand the military power and presence in Vietnam as the executive saw fit in the interest of fighting communism in Southeast Asia. But the Pentagon Papers really brought all that stuff out. It was really controversial across the United States. Richard Nixon was very concerned with it, and Richard Nixon actually had Daniel Ellsberg's doctor's clinic broken into to try to effectively steal records about Daniel Ellsberg that might be used to smear Daniel Ellsberg's character. And this, of course, was one of the first incidents that kind of lead to the resignation of Richard Nixon in 1974, when the eventual Watergate scandal happened. Watergate was another break-in, of course, that Nixon had organized to try to get dirt on the then Democratic presidential candidacy of George McGovern, whom he ran against in 1972, and interestingly beat in a landslide. He really did not need to bug the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. to win that election, but of course Nixon did, using individuals like G. Gordon Liddy and the Plumbers, as they were called. And before that, of course, the break-in of Daniel Ellsberg's doctor's office to try to get dirt on Ellsberg was just one of the myriad of examples of the corruption of Richard Nixon during his presidency. So the factoid for this week is the Pentagon Papers, a illegally released trove of classified documents that Daniel Ellsberg provided to journalists. First the Washington Post and eventually the New York Times, which released these classified documents that very much were seen as very, very damaging on the United States government and its handling of the Vietnam War, revealing all kinds of elements of misinformation surrounding the Vietnam War. And so the Pentagon Papers and Daniel Ellsberg, a a leaking of classified Defense Department documents under Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara that eventually became a trove of primary source documents about the Vietnam War, but was seen as really controversial when they were released in 1971 and really brought the ire of Richard Nixon, who sought at all costs to prosecute and or smear Daniel Ellsberg using things like illegal break-ins. So Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, 1971. Let's have a great week. I'll see you in the discussion forum. And don't forget, big week this week. So let me know if you have any questions about the paper, and I will see you in the discussion forum.